Hey everybody, it's Dave here at Vinaka Urban Farm. It's a really exciting day on the farm here today. It is the day that the tomatoes start turning color. Specifically our cherry sun gold tomatoes. So if you can look down at we're here in the tomato patch part of the yard, and I'll zoom in. You can see this guy right here starting to turn yellow. Sun golds, as per their name, are orange tomato. When it'll be mature, it'll be orange. So these are the first ones, cherry tomatoes. They're very small and they mature faster than the other tomatoes. So that's why those guys are maturing first. So while I'm dealing with tomatoes and I got excited about tomatoes, I started pruning my tomatoes, and I thought I'd make a little video about how I do that. If you'll notice, here, let me step back and give you a little perspective. I grow my tomatoes vertically, right? There's this big line of wooden poles, and each of those poles has a tomato growing up it. So tomato plant starts down here, winds its way up here. It's a lot different than the, I think, conventional way of growing tomatoes, which is in tomato cages. Tomato cages are an easy, quick way to plant your tomatoes and kind of set it and forget it. But as anybody who's ever worked with those tomato cages knows, they get really unwieldy, and the tomato kind of sprawls everywhere. It doesn't really tamely take to being caged, and it grows really thick. It can be hard to see all the tomatoes inside. Whereas here, I mean, you can clearly see really easily all the tomatoes here, just kind of looking from the side. So they're one advantage to growing things vertically. One reason I do it is because it's really easy to spot and harvest tomatoes. Just reach out and pick them instead of having to go into the maw of the tomato cage. And another reason I like growing them this way is because you can plant more in a smaller space, and that's really important to me because I'm an urban farmer, right? I have about 400 square feet of total growing space here. 18 tomato plants in each of these rows, 72 total tomato plants in this backyard space, and as you can see, they don't even take up a quarter of the space, right? We got a lot of stuff except for tomatoes. So growing tomatoes vertically is just a really cool idea if you're into gardening and you want to make a little bit more use of their space, have an easier harvest, and you're willing to put in a little bit of extra work. In order to grow tomatoes vertically, though, you just got to know a couple small things. It's pretty simple. First of all, you can only grow indeterminate tomatoes vertically. There are two kinds of tomatoes that they sell, generally speaking. One is determinate, and we grow one kind of determinate tomato. I won't show it to you. It's out in the front yard, but it's the classic Roma tomato. And we grow that in cages. It's not, I would like to find better cages because they're very thick and unwieldy because they're very productive plants. But Roma tomatoes are just a determinate variety. And what that means is they only produce a certain amount of tomatoes, and they kind of produce them all at once, and they produce an abundance of them. Now the consequence is that they only have a certain length of growing period, and you can't train them vertically like you can indeterminate tomatoes. Indeterminate tomatoes will grow for as long as there is good weather and conditions for them to grow, and they'll continue to produce and produce and produce, sort of like the difference between June-bearing and ever-bearing strawberries. June-bearing strawberries give you tons of strawberries all at once, typically in May or June, and ever-bearing varieties give you a small amount over a continuous, a long period of time. So indeterminate tomatoes will give you just a longer tomato harvest, and you can trellis them. And the way that you do that, though, requires you to know just a little bit about the tomato plant, and I'll show you in this video all that you need to know. It's very simple. You start with your indeterminate tomato plant, and you arrange it so that you can grow it vertically. There's a lot of different ways to do this. I do it a really simple way and not the most efficient way, just the best way that I could do it this year on my small farm. So you plant the tomato alongside whatever mechanism. Could be a string, could be a wooden pole like this, that you're going to trellis it up. And the way that I do my tomatoes is that I have these poles. These are 2-inch treated 8-foot long poles, and I would love for them to be 12 feet, but I just couldn't get them at my local hardware store this spring. And I make sure they're treated so they don't degrade so fast in the earth, and I can get more use out of them. And as they grow, they're going to tend to want to sprawl. And tomatoes actually make 2 kinds of branches, right? A lot of people don't know this, but if you pay close attention, you can tell really easily. They make this kind of branch right here and right here, right, that sprawls out and only produces leaves. These are lower old leaves, so they don't look really happy, but the tomato plant as a whole is just fine. Those ones you want to keep on the plant, but in between the stem and the branch that has the leaf, there in almost every single node that there's a stem leaf intersection, there's going to be a sucker growing out. And this sucker is different than the regular leaf bearing branch in that it's kind of like a little mini extra tomato plant that will grow its own branch leaf intersections and eventually would grow its own fruit, right? So these suckers you're going to have to prune off, otherwise it's going to sprawl and you won't be able to grow your tomato vertically, right? And it'll get to be a bit of a mess and will take up a lot more space, etc., etc. So you just prune these off, and you can actually see at this intersection that I've already done this, right? I already pruned off a sucker at this node. And usually when you do that, they don't grow back. Like you can see all the little remnants of the suckers that I've already pruned off, and it didn't grow back. But sometimes they grow back, so whenever you do this, check from the bottom up, and you can just, if it's little, you can yoink it like that. It'll come right off, right? That's a tiny little tomato plant. If you're a really, really go-getter, overachiever, you could put this in a little hormone solution or soak it in some water. It would grow some roots. In fact, probably if I just planted it right here, right now, it would start to root, because tomatoes are amazing, and grow another tomato plant. But I don't want any more tomatoes in this space, so I won't do that. But anyway, so you just take that sucker off and you tie it. I use this little Velcro tape you can get at a lot of garden centers to the stake or the string or whatever, and it'll just grow straight up. And then they start to grow really fast around this time of year. It's late June, so you're gonna have to do this about every week. And you just scan up. So far I've gotten up to this point up here. Prune off the sucker there at the intersection. Prune off the sucker here at this intersection, right? And there we go. We're all the way to the top, and now it'll grow happily vertically and be just fine. So I didn't mention that there is a third kind of branch that comes off of the main stem, and that is the fruiting branch. But these are so easy to spot, right? So the kinds of branches you want to keep are the ones with just leaves and the ones with just flowers and fruit, right? You want to keep the leaf ones, the flower fruit ones, but not the suckers, right? And it can be a good idea, just as fundamentals, a good practice, to keep the last sucker at the top of the plant unpruned. So if I was really determined, I could like really reach my fingers down there and get these little suckers that are just forming. But I just like to keep the top one kind of there. So because in case anything goes wrong with the plant, like a strong wind blows or I knock into it or something, I could knock the top of it off, or something crazy could happen like that. That sucker will grow into another growing tip and I'll still have a tomato that grows. But if you remove the last growing tip, then that tomato is done for and you won't have any more for the year. So it's very simple, very easy. Once you have some practice, it'll be no trouble at all for you to spot the suckers, and that's how you vertically grow tomatoes. Thanks for watching the video. Subscribe and like if you enjoy it, and either way, I'll catch you soon. Salako, I'm out.